Have you ever wondered if heaven still touches earth? If miracles are not just ancient legends, but living signs meant for our own time? Tonight, we embark on a journey that stretches across centuries and continents, a journey through 30 extraordinary encounters where the Virgin Mary reached down from heaven and changed lives forever. These are not fairy tales born from imagination, but stories carried in the collective memory of villagers, recorded in the sacred writings of saints, whispered from grandparents to grandchildren across generations, and confirmed by men and women who could never forget what they witnessed with their own eyes. Some of these miracles happened in forgotten chapels, where old priests or frightened children prayed with tears streaming down their faces. Others occurred on stormy seas where death seemed certain, in hospital rooms where hope had died, in prison cells where despair reigned, in the very heart of wars where humanity had lost its way. They touched lives across every social boundary, the poor and the wealthy, saints already walking in holiness, and sinners trapped in darkness. Every single miracle leaves us with the same profound truth. Mary is a mother who never abandons her children, no matter how far they have wandered or how deep their suffering has become. These miracles are not about Mary taking the place of Christ. No, she points us to Him always, just as she has from the first moment of Scripture until now. Her role is to lead us closer to Jesus, but she does so with the exquisite tenderness of a mother stepping into the most desperate moments of human life, bringing comfort where there was none and hope where it seemed impossible. As you journey through these accounts tonight, imagine yourself present in each scene. See the tears glistening on the faces of those praying in desperation. Hear the howling of stormy winds, the crackle of consuming fire, the labored breathing of a dying person. Feel the electric moment when everything changes, when the impossible bends to mercy, when despair transforms into hope, when heaven breaks through into human suffering. This is more than storytelling. It is an invitation into mystery. Perhaps you carry a burden too heavy for your shoulders. Perhaps you have wondered if your prayers disappear into silence. By the end of these 30 miracles, I pray you will discover what countless believers have found throughout history. When Mary intercedes, nothing is too heavy, no night too dark, no storm too violent for her maternal love to overcome. Miracle 1. The statue that became weightless. Italy, 1240. The Mongol hordes swept across northern Italy like wildfire in the year 1240, their mounted warriors leaving destruction in their wake. Churches burned, crosses toppled, and terror gripped every village in their path. In one small chapel nestled in the hills outside Padua, an elderly priest named Father Dinton trembled as messengers brought increasingly dire news that the invading soldiers were marching ever closer to his beloved sanctuary. At the very heart of his modest chapel stood a treasured statue of the Virgin Mary, carved from local stone by a master craftsman generations earlier. For decades, villagers had knelt before this sacred image, pouring out their prayers like precious oil, lighting countless candles that had dripped their wax at her feet, whispering their deepest hopes and most desperate fears to the mother they trusted above all earthly help. Father Dinton understood with growing dread that if the Mongol invaders destroyed this statue, the spiritual blow to his people's faith would be devastating beyond repair. This was not merely stone and chisel work. It was the physical anchor of their community's devotion, the silent witness to their prayers, the tangible reminder of Mary's presence among them. But the statue presented an impossible challenge. It was massive. Well over 200 pounds of solid carved stone that had required multiple strong men to position when it was first installed. The frail priest, bent with age and weakened by years of humble service, could never hope to move such weight. His arms shook just carrying the communion vessels. How could he possibly save Mary's image? Still, as the thunder of approaching hoofbeats grew closer and smoke began to rise from neighboring villages, desperation drove him to his knees. With tears streaming down his weathered face, he pressed his hands against the cold stone and whispered with all the faith his breaking heart could muster, "Mother, if you wish to be saved, save yourself. If you wish to protect your children, help me carry you to safety." Then the impossible happened with a gentleness that defied every law of nature. When he wrapped his trembling arms around the statue that should have crushed him, it felt as light as a linen cloth. as weightless as a feather floating on summer air. He lifted it effortlessly onto his shoulders, marveling at how something so substantial could become so manageable through divine intervention. Through the dark forest he hurried, the statue balanced perfectly despite his shaking limbs. Mongol soldiers thundered past on the main roads, their torches casting dancing shadows between the trees, their harsh voices calling orders in a foreign tongue. Yet somehow, miraculously, Father Dinton remained invisible to their searching eyes, as though Mary herself had thrown a cloak of protection around them both. By dawn's first light, he had carried the precious statue miles away to a hidden cave, where local Christians had prepared a secret sanctuary. Only when he set it down did the statue return to its full crushing weight, settling into place with the solid finality of natural stone. Later, when the immediate danger had passed, and villagers attempted to move the statue again to return it to the chapel, they found it had resumed its normal, immovable mass. Multiple strong men strained and struggled, but could barely shift it an inch. The miracle was not merely stone becoming light. It was a profound sign that what seems impossible for human strength becomes perfectly possible when Mary chooses to share our burdens. To this day, the story is told with reverence throughout the region. An old man carried the impossible because heaven itself carried him, and Mary's love proved stronger than any earthly army. Miracle 2. A letter carried to heaven. Naples, 17th century. In the bustling, sun-drenched streets of 17th century Naples, where music drifted from balconies and markets overflowed with color and life, there lived a reality far different for those forgotten by fortune. Domenico was one such soul, a poor orphan whose dreams seemed as distant as the stars themselves. While noblemen's children received the finest education money could provide, Domenico had nothing. No family name to open doors, no inheritance to secure his future, no earthly benefactor to sponsor his deepest longing. Yet his heart burned with an unquenchable desire to serve God as a priest. He spent his days doing whatever menial work he could find, sweeping shop floors, hauling water, running errands for pennies, while his nights were devoted to prayer in a tiny chapel where he felt closest to heaven. The other parishioners, wrapped in their own concerns, barely noticed the ragged boy who knelt for hours before the altar, his lips moving in silent supplication. One particularly desperate evening, when his last coins had been spent on a piece of bread and his future seemed more hopeless than ever, Domenico made his way to the chapel, carrying with him a piece of rough parchment and a stub of charcoal. By flickering candlelight, he poured his entire soul onto that humble paper. In his simple, unschooled handwriting, he told Mary everything: the gnawing hunger that kept him awake at night, the mockery he endured from those who thought his priestly dreams were foolish ambition, his unwavering belief that God was calling him, despite his poverty, and his absolute conviction that if anyone in heaven or on earth could help him, it was the Blessed Mother who had herself known poverty and uncertainty. The letter grew long as his heart emptied itself of years of accumulated hope and fear. He wrote of his promise to serve the poorest of the poor if he could become a priest, his willingness to go anywhere God might send him, his desire to bring comfort to others who, like himself, felt forgotten by the world. When he finished, his hands shook as he carefully folded the precious document. With the reverence of one placing an offering on God's altar, he positioned the letter beneath Mary's feet at the base of her statue, then knelt in prayer until exhaustion finally drove him home to his corner in a boarding house for the destitute. The next morning brought wonder. Father Giuseppe, the parish priest who had served the community for 30 years, discovered the letter during his customary early morning prayers. As he read Domenico's heartfelt words, tears began flowing down his cheeks. Here was faith in its purest form, hope despite impossible circumstances, a young man's complete surrender to God's will combined with urgent supplication for help. Moved beyond measure, Father Giuseppe made an immediate decision that would change everything. He would personally sponsor Domenico's education, using his own modest savings and calling upon wealthy parishioners to support this obviously called young man. But the miracle was only beginning to unfold its full dimensions. Within days, Count Alessandro Di Marco, one of Naples' most influential noblemen, requested a private meeting with Father Giuseppe. The Count's message was extraordinary. He had experienced a vivid dream in which the Virgin Mary appeared to him, holding what appeared to be a letter. In the dream, she spoke with unmistakable authority. "Help this boy. He belongs to me. His future service will bring glory to my son." The Count described details of Domenico's appearance and circumstances that he could not possibly have known through natural means. Convinced that heaven itself had intervened, he committed to become Domenico's lifelong benefactor, providing not only for his seminary education, but for all his future needs as a priest. Years later, Father Domenico was ordained and became renowned throughout Naples as Mary's own priest. His homilies drew crowds, his compassion for the poor was legendary, and his devotion to the Blessed Mother inspired countless souls to deeper faith. He never forgot that his entire vocation began with a simple letter written by candlelight and placed at Mary's feet. What strikes us most profoundly about this miracle is not merely the provision it represents, but the intimacy it reveals. A letter written by a desperate boy in a forgotten corner of Naples did not vanish into silence, but was read in heaven and answered through the movement of human hearts at precisely the right moment. It reminds us with stunning clarity that when we pray, especially when we write our deepest thoughts to Mary, she needs no postal system to receive our correspondence. Our faith becomes the envelope, our tears the ink, and heaven always reads what love has written. Miracle 3. The Cloak That Would Not Burn France, 1800s. In a contemplative convent nestled in the French countryside, where sisters dedicated their lives to serving the poorest members of society, there lived a nun whose simple faith would soon be tested by fire, literally. Sister Clare was known throughout the community not for extraordinary mystical experiences or dramatic spiritual gifts, but for her quiet, unwavering devotion to the Blessed Mother and her tireless service to those society had forgotten. She possessed few earthly belongings, as befitted her vows of poverty, but among them was a simple blue cloak that she had embroidered herself with intricate depictions of Mary's Sacred Heart. The needlework was exquisite, each stitch placed with the same care she brought to her prayers. "This cloak is nothing special," she would often say to the younger sisters who admired her handiwork. "But when I wear it, I remember that with Mary covering me, I need fear nothing in this world." The sisters smiled at what they assumed was merely pious sentiment, not understanding that Sister Clare's words would soon be tested in the most literal way imaginable. One bitter winter night, when howling winds rattled the old convent's windows and snow piled high against the doors, disaster struck without warning. A fire erupted in the convent kitchen, likely sparked by embers from the great hearth where the sisters prepared meals for the local poor. The flames, fed by dry wooden beams and accelerated by winter drafts, spread with terrifying speed through the ancient building. Thick, choking smoke filled the narrow corridors as orange flames leaped from room to room, consuming everything in their path. The sisters, awakened by screams and the acrid smell of burning wood, scrambled from their cells and rushed toward the exits in their nightclothes, coughing and gasping for clean air. In the courtyard, as the Mother Superior frantically counted heads by the light of the blazing building, her heart stopped. One sister was missing, Sister Clare. Several nuns immediately volunteered to go back into the inferno to search for her, but the heat was too intense, the smoke too thick. It seemed impossible that anyone could survive in that consuming hell. Then, through the billowing black smoke that poured from the main entrance, a figure appeared that made the watching sisters gasp in amazement. It was Sister Clare, walking calmly through the flames as though strolling through a garden on a peaceful morning. Her blue cloak fluttered around her, completely untouched by the fire that raged on every side. Sparks flew like angry wasps around her form. Glowing embers fell like rain from the burning ceiling above. But her cloak remained pristine, its blue fabric unmarked by so much as a single scorch mark. Even more remarkably, her hair and skin showed no signs of exposure to the intense heat that was melting metal and turning stone to powder. When she reached safety and the other sisters surrounded her with cries of relief and wonder, Sister Clare's explanation was characteristically simple and faith-filled. She told them that when the fire first surrounded her in her cell, trapping her with walls of flame on every side, she had pulled her cloak tight around her shoulders and whispered Mary's name with complete trust. At that instant, she said, it was as though an invisible wall of protection had descended around her. She could see the flames raging just inches away, could hear the roar of destruction, but she felt no heat, breathed no smoke, experienced no fear. Step by step, Mary had guided her through the maze of fire to safety. The blue cloak was carefully preserved by the community as a sacred relic, displayed in their rebuilt chapel, not merely as an interesting artifact, but as powerful testimony to a profound spiritual truth. For the sisters, it became far more than fabric and thread. It was living proof that when Mary truly covers us with her protection, even the most consuming flames cannot touch what she has chosen to preserve. The miracle spread quickly throughout the region, encouraging people everywhere to trust more deeply in Mary's maternal care. But perhaps its most important message was this: the protection Mary offers is not always dramatic rescue from danger, but sometimes the courage and peace to walk through fire itself, knowing that her love makes us untouchable by anything that might truly harm our souls. Miracle 4. The Painter and the Threat of Darkness. Paris. In the artistic heart of Paris, where creativity flourished in studios tucked beneath sloping roofs and masterpieces emerged from humble workshops, there lived a painter whose talent had earned him recognition throughout the city's religious circles. Jean-Baptiste was renowned for his tender, luminous images of the Virgin Mary, paintings that seemed to glow within a light and drew viewers into prayer simply by gazing upon them. But Jean-Baptiste had developed a distinctive signature in his work that set him apart from other religious artists of his time. In every painting of the Blessed Mother, without exception, he included at the base of the canvas a defeated demon, crushed beneath Mary's feet and writhing in obvious agony. His artistic treatment of evil was so realistic, so filled with tortured detail, that viewers could almost hear the creature's screams of rage and frustration. This artistic choice was not mere decoration or theological symbol for Jean-Baptiste. It was his personal declaration of war against the forces of darkness, his public testimony that Mary's triumph over evil was complete and eternal. Each brushstroke that depicted Satan's defeat was painted with the fervor of a warrior and the devotion of a saint. The consistent theme in his artwork, however, began to attract attention from more than just human admirers. One night, as Jean-Baptiste slept in his modest apartment above his studio, he experienced a dream so vivid and terrifying that it would change the course of his artistic career forever. In this nightmarish vision, a figure of pure malevolence appeared beside his bed, the devil himself, radiating hatred and fury. The demonic presence spoke with a voice like grinding stone and burning sulfur. "Cease painting me beneath her feet, artist, or your life will end in agony. I will not tolerate this humiliation any longer." When Jean-Baptiste awoke, his body was drenched in cold sweat and his hands shook uncontrollably. The dream had been so real, so convincing, that he could still smell the stench of sulfur in his room. Fear gripped his heart like an icy fist, and for several days he could not bring himself to enter his studio. But as the initial terror began to fade, his devotion to Mary proved stronger than his fear of diabolic threats. If anything, the devil's rage only convinced him that his paintings were accomplishing exactly what God intended, proclaiming Mary's victory over evil in a way that clearly enraged the forces of darkness. The next morning, he climbed the scaffolding inside the Church of Saint-Sulpice, where he had been commissioned to paint a magnificent new altarpiece depicting the Assumption of Mary. As always, he planned to include his signature image of the defeated demon at the base of the work. He had been painting for several hours, lost in the meditative rhythm of his craft, when disaster struck without warning. A sudden, violent gust of wind, impossible in the enclosed church, toppled the scaffolding structure. Jean-Baptiste plummeted toward the unforgiving stone floor far below, his brushes and paints scattering through the air around him. In that terrifying moment of free fall, with death rushing up to meet him, Jean-Baptiste managed to cry out with his remaining breath, "Mary, save me." The words were part prayer, part desperate scream, part absolute surrender to divine mercy. Instead of the crushing impact he expected, he landed with impossible gentleness, as though caught by unseen arms and lowered to the floor like a feather drifting to earth. Stunned and disbelieving, he looked up at the unfinished canvas he had been working on. The painting of Mary seemed to glow with supernatural light, her painted eyes appearing almost alive with compassion and triumph. The devil's threat had been answered, but not with the artist's death. Rather, with a demonstration of Mary's protecting power that left no doubt about who truly ruled over the forces of good and evil. From that transformational day forward, Jean-Baptiste approached his art with renewed understanding. While he continued to paint Mary in all her radiant glory, he no longer emphasized the devil's torment and defeat. Instead, his canvases focused entirely on Mary's luminous victory, allowing her triumphant light to overshadow any darkness without needing to dwell on evil's anguish. He had learned through direct experience that Mary's protection extends not only beyond death, but beyond fear itself, and that her victory over darkness is so complete that it needs no emphasis on evil's suffering, only celebration of good's eternal triumph. Miracle 5. The officer's family and the maid healed rural France. In the rolling countryside of rural France, where life moved to the slower rhythms of farming seasons and church bells, Captain Henri Dubois faced challenges that military training had never prepared him to handle. A career officer of modest means, he struggled daily to provide for his beloved wife Marie and their 4 young children on a soldier's meager pension. Their small farmhouse, inherited from Marie's family, required constant repairs they could barely afford. The children needed clothing, food, education, expenses that seemed to multiply faster than Henri's ability to meet them. In their desperation, they made the decision to hire domestic help, hoping that an extra pair of hands might ease the burden of daily survival. The young woman who came to work for them was named Bernadette, a quiet, gentle soul from an even poorer family in the next village. What the Dubois family did not initially know was that Bernadette suffered from severe epileptic seizures, a condition that made her unemployable in most households of that era. She had hidden her illness out of desperate need for work and fear of rejection. As weeks passed, however, Bernadette's condition became impossible to conceal. Her seizures grew more frequent and violent, often striking without warning as she went about her household duties. She would collapse in the middle of cooking, washing, or tending the children, her body convulsing terrifyingly while foam formed at her mouth and her eyes rolled back unseeing. The neighborhood whispered with growing alarm. Superstition ran deep in rural communities, and many believed that epilepsy was a sign of demonic possession or divine curse. Concerned neighbors began pressing Henri and Marie with urgent warnings. Send her away before misfortune spreads to your own family. Such conditions are contagious to the soul. The pressure mounted as local families threatened to avoid the Dubois household entirely if they continued harboring someone they viewed as spiritually dangerous. Even the village priest suggested that it might be wisest to find Bernadette employment elsewhere for the safety of all concerned. But Captain Henry, drawing on the moral courage that had served him well in military service, refused to abandon the suffering young woman. No, he declared firmly to all who pressed him. She is under Mary's protection now. We took her in as one of our own, and we will not cast her out because of an illness she cannot control. Marie, despite her own fears and the social pressure from other wives in the community, supported her husband's decision completely. Together, they made a choice that would test their faith and define their family's character. They would entrust Bernadette's healing to prayer. The entire household began a solemn novena, 9 days of concentrated prayer to the Virgin Mary. Each evening after supper, the family gathered in their small parlor with Bernadette, lighting candles before a simple statue of Mary and reciting the rosary together. Henri's deep military voice blended with Marie's gentle tones and the children's innocent whispers as they begged heaven for mercy. They prayed not just for Bernadette's healing, but for strength to care for her, regardless of the outcome. They asked Mary to help them see her suffering through eyes of compassion rather than fear, to treat her with the dignity every human soul deserves. Day after day, they maintained their prayer vigil. Bernadette's seizures continued, sometimes striking even during their prayer times. But the family never wavered in their commitment to both care for her and intercede for her healing. By the 9th day, no visible change had occurred. Bernadette was no better. The neighbors' criticism had not lessened, and the family's financial struggles remained as pressing as ever. Yet when Henri knelt alone after Mass that final morning, he whispered with complete sincerity, "Mother, I trust you completely, even if nothing changes. We will continue to care for Bernadette as long as she needs us." The very next morning brought transformation beyond their wildest hopes. Bernadette awoke completely well, sitting up in bed with clarity and energy she had not possessed in years. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Her seizures were gone entirely, never to return. Village doctors, summoned to examine this impossible recovery, could find no medical explanation for such complete neurological healing. The Dubois family burst into tears of gratitude, decorating their parish altar with the most beautiful flowers they could afford and singing hymns of thanksgiving that brought the entire congregation to tears. Their simple farmhouse became a place of pilgrimage for other families dealing with similar medical challenges. For Henri and Marie, the miracle represented far more than one person's physical healing. It was profound confirmation that mercy flows strongest when faith is tested longest, and that God's grace multiplies when human compassion refuses to abandon those whom society would rather forget. Miracle 6. The Dying Monk and the Devil's Ledger. Monastery of Grande Chartreuse, 1313. In the remote monastery of Grande Chartreuse, perched high in the French Alps where silence reigned supreme and prayer marked every hour, Brother Thomas lay dying. In his simple cell, for 40 years he had lived the austere life of a Carthusian monk, dedicating himself to contemplation, penance, and the pursuit of holiness through solitude and prayer. Now, at 73 years of age, his frail body was failing. His breathing had become labored and shallow, his skin pale as parchment, his strength ebbing like water through sand. The other brothers gathered around his straw bed, whispering prayers and preparing for what seemed to be his final hours on earth. The stone cell, illuminated only by flickering candles, felt heavy with the weight of approaching death. Brother Thomas had lived a good life by all earthly measures. He had been faithful to his vows, kind to his brothers, devoted in his prayers, generous in his penances. Yet as death drew near, his soul was troubled by memories of sins from his younger days, failures and weaknesses that had haunted him throughout his religious life. Suddenly, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. The candle flames guttered and nearly died, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A presence entered that made every monk present feel an overwhelming sense of dread and revulsion. Brother Thomas opened his failing eyes to see a figure of pure malevolence standing beside his bed. It was the devil himself, his appearance so terrifying that several of the watching monks fell to their knees in prayer. In the demon's clawed hands was a massive black ledger, its pages filled with writing in what appeared to be blood. With sadistic pleasure, the devil began reading aloud every sin Brother Thomas had ever committed, page after page of failures, weaknesses, moments of pride, anger, lustful thoughts, and spiritual laziness. The ledger seemed endless, containing not just major transgressions, but every small failing, every moment of less than perfect charity, every instance where he had fallen short of complete holiness. "These sins are yours, monk," the demon hissed with venomous satisfaction. "Every single one is recorded in heaven's justice. You belong to me now, regardless of your years of prayer and penance. Your soul is forfeit." Terror seized Brother Thomas as he recognized the truth of every accusation. The sins were real, the failures genuine. He had confessed many of them over the years, but others had been forgotten or rationalized away. Faced with this comprehensive accounting, despair threatened to swallow his last hope of salvation. But just as the darkness seemed complete, the chamber filled with radiant light that made the candles seem like pale shadows. The very air seemed to shimmer with divine presence as the Virgin Mary appeared, holding the infant Jesus in her arms. Her beauty was beyond earthly description, her face radiating both infinite tenderness and unshakable authority. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, but carried the power of absolute truth. "My child, do not fear. I have never abandoned you, and I will not do so now in your hour of greatest need." She turned to her divine Son, and in that moment, Brother Thomas witnessed the most beautiful conversation in the history of creation. With maternal love and infinite compassion, Mary pleaded his case before Jesus, not denying his sins, but pointing to his years of sincere repentance, his genuine efforts to serve God, his human weakness that deserved mercy rather than condemnation. Jesus, his eyes filled with the love that had driven him to the cross for precisely such souls as Brother Thomas, nodded in acceptance of his mother's intercession. He raised his hand in blessing, and instantly the monk felt every sin, every failure, every burden of guilt lifted from his soul as though they had never existed. The demon shrieked in fury and frustration before vanishing into the shadows like smoke blown away by wind. His ledger of accusations crumbled to ash and disappeared, powerless against the mercy that flowed from the heart of God through Mary's maternal intercession. Peace flooded Brother Thomas's soul like warm sunlight after a terrible storm. The fear of judgment was replaced by absolute certainty of forgiveness. The terror of hell transformed into joyful anticipation of heaven. His breathing eased, his face relaxed into serenity, and he spent his final minutes on earth in perfect prayer. When he breathed his last moments later, his brother monks swore they saw him smiling as though he had already glimpsed the beatific vision. They testified that his face glowed with peace and that the cell was filled with the fragrance of flowers, though it was the depths of winter in the mountains. The miracle spread throughout the Carthusian order and beyond, carrying a message of hope to countless souls troubled by their own failures and sins. It became a powerful reminder that Mary's intercession is strongest precisely at the hour of death, when human souls most desperately need an advocate before the throne of divine justice. Brother Thomas's story encouraged monks, priests, and lay people alike to trust completely in Mary's maternal protection, knowing that she who had brought the Savior into the world continues to bring salvation to those who call upon her in their moment of greatest need. Miracle 7. Mary, Mother of Purgatory, Vision of Saint Rita of Cascia. Centuries later, in the small Italian town of Cascia Saint, Rita experienced a vision of such profound beauty and comfort that it would transform the Catholic understanding of prayer for the dead and Mary's role in the purification of souls. In this extraordinary mystical experience, Saint Rita found herself transported to purgatory, that mysterious realm where souls undergo purification before entering the perfect joy of heaven. What she saw challenged every harsh depiction of this intermediate state that human imagination had conjured. Purgatory appeared as a vast landscape of gentle flames that purified rather than tortured, where souls waited in patient longing for their final purification to be complete. These were not the fires of hell, which punish and destroy, but the fires of divine love, which cleanse and perfect. The souls she saw were not in despair, but in hope, knowing that their suffering had meaning and would end in perfect union with God. Yet even in this place of hopeful waiting, suffering was real. Souls yearned for God with an intensity that was almost unbearable. Their love for the divine purified to such clarity that being separated from Him caused profound spiritual anguish. They could see heaven's glory, but were not yet pure enough to enter, like travelers who can see their destination, but must complete the final portion of their journey. Then, in the most beautiful part of her vision, Saint Rita witnessed Mary's role in this process of purification. The Blessed Mother appeared in purgatory as a queen of mercy, her mantle glowing with soft blue light that brought comfort to every soul it touched. She moved among the suffering with the graceful care of a mother tending her children, and wherever she walked, the intensity of purification was tempered by her maternal presence. Mary's presence transformed suffering into something bearable, longing into patient hope. She whispered prayers of encouragement to souls who felt forgotten, reminded them of God's love when the weight of purification seemed overwhelming, and most importantly, she assured them that their time of preparation was not forgotten by heaven. Some souls, St. Rita observed, had their chains of attachment to earthly things fall away at Mary's touch. A few, whose purification was nearly complete, actually rose from the flames and ascended into heaven, their joy so radiant that it lit up the entire realm like shooting stars. Most remarkably, St. Rita heard Mary speak words that would echo through centuries of Catholic devotion. "I am mother of these souls as truly as I am mother of those on earth. I will not forget them in their time of preparation. When the living pray for them, offer masses for their release, perform acts of charity in their memory, you join me in easing their path to perfect union with my Son. The vision continued as saint. Rita witnessed the profound connection between the prayers of the living and the relief of souls in purgatory. Every rosary prayed with intention for the dead, every mass offered for their release, every work of mercy performed in their memory sent waves of comfort and acceleration through the realm of purification. She saw that on feast days dedicated to Mary, the Blessed Mother's presence in purgatory became even more powerful. Souls who had been devoted to her during their earthly lives found their purification shortened, their suffering eased, their hope strengthened by her special intercession. When the vision ended and Saint Rita returned to normal consciousness, she was forever changed. She understood that death was not a wall separating the living from the dead, but a doorway through which love and prayer could still flow. She realized that the communion of saints was not merely a theological concept, but a living reality in which earthly prayers could genuinely help souls in their final preparation for heaven. The vision spread quickly throughout Italy and beyond, inspiring countless Catholics to dedicate their prayers, sacrifices, and good works to the relief of souls in purgatory. Families began the beautiful tradition of offering masses on the anniversaries of their loved ones' deaths. Religious communities instituted special prayer services for the faithful departed. Even simple believers found comfort in knowing that their daily rosaries and small acts of kindness could reach across the veil of death to help souls they had never met. The miracle of Saint Rita's vision was not just in what she saw, but in how it changed the living. People no longer viewed death as a complete separation, but as a transition in which love continues to be effective. They understood that Mary's motherhood extends beyond earthly life into the realm of purification, and that her maternal care follows souls even into the fires of divine love. Most importantly, the vision revealed that no soul is ever truly alone in its journey to God. Mary walks among those being purified, just as she walks among the living, bringing comfort, hope, and the assurance that suffering accepted with patience becomes a pathway to perfect joy.